The test is simple. Remove your hand from the box, and you die.
What's in the box?
Pain.
Will you shut up? This test doesn't even hurt, you big pussy. It actually kind of tickles. I wonder what it would feel like if I put my willy in here.
Dune, Arrakis, desert planet. The home of the spice melange. What the fuck are you talking about, you might be thinking? I am talking about Frank Herbert's classic, Dune, a book which is widely considered one of the greatest science fiction novels ever written. There's no denying its cultural impact, as it helped inspire Star Wars, and, of course, Warhammer 40k nabbed a few ideas like having a God Emperor. For those of you unfamiliar with the novels, gather round and I shall tell you a tale. To summarize Dune, in the future, mankind has taken to the stars, and a desert planet called Arrakis takes center stage as a pivotal world in humanity's space empire. On this dust bowl live giant worms that fart magical space dust called the spice melange, which is the ultimate trade commodity. Why? Because it's super LSD, which allows you to see through time, help navigate through space, and increases your lifespan, among other things. Without it, humanity would be doomed, and mankind's entire space empire would fall apart because of the universe's dependence on it for space travel. Anyway, a house of nobles called Atreides, loyal to the Emperor, are tasked with being caretakers of the planet, but get massacred by another noble house made up of deviant bastards called the Harkonnen. However, a few Atreides survive, one of the key members being Paul, a teenager who is actually the product of a 1,000-year-old eugenics program run by secret agent nuns with psychic powers. One of them happens to be his mum. Anyway, on Arrakis are a group of grubby natives called the Fremen, who live like the Bedouin tribes of old. Paul turns out to be these savages' messiah and riles them up into a religious fervor in order to get revenge against the Harkonnen. Thus, a jihad is born, and there is bloodshed galore and politics until Paul takes his place as the Emperor of Arrakis, and thus the universe. The entire Dune series of books and its universe are full of intergalactic politics, murder, betrayal, revenge, and destiny. Also, there are space Jews. No word of a lie. The whole universe is fucking weird. You can see why David Lynch wanted to make a film of it. There's a lot of lore to digest. It's very meaty, yet the first and most famous book is simply a straightforward hero's journey with weird concepts and political intrigue. It's a very dense volume, certainly difficult to adapt into a film, yet here we are with the second attempt to bring a classic to the visual medium of film, this time by French director Denis Villeneuve. Fuck it. Frenchie McBaguette. Yes, Frenchie here thinks he can adapt this complex book to the big screen. Dune is a weighty tome and not easy to adapt, yet it has seen various attempts. It's been adapted into a movie once before by David Lynch, a low-budget sci-fi channel TV series, a video game, a different kind of video game, comic books, a board game, and even a coloring book. Really, there is a coloring book. I own one. See, it's real. Yet these still don't do the book true justice, and when it comes to movie adaptations, Dune has not been translated to the big screen well. David Lynch tried, but it was utter crap, and Lynch would later disown it. It's not without merit, as it does have a very distinct visual style, but what was with the pug? Is there some deeper meaning to it? Am I too stupid to understand the symbolism? Have I been David Lynched?
You fuckhead.
Ridley Scott also had an amazing Dune script, but the studio insisted he film in Mexico, and he refused because he thought Mexico was too smelly. Those are his words. Hey, he's not a racist. He is an ethnicity critic. There's a subtle difference. Arty-farty film director Alejandro Jodorowsky at one point had a vision for his Dune movie, but it was fucking mental and would never have been made. So instead, he made a documentary about how awesome his version would have been had the film studios not jilted him. God knows what he thinks of Denis' attempt, but at least Denis doesn't hate the American film-going audience. Now, Pepe Le Pew here has stepped up to the challenge of adapting the seemingly unadaptable.
Does Denis Villeneuve, whatever the fuck his name is, does he succeed in making a good adaptation of Dune? Well, it's time to smack talk.
Denis begins by throwing a chunk of exposition at us in the form of a pretty liberal arts lecture on post-colonialism, as the noble savages that are the Fremen tell us about the mean old Harkonnens exploiting them. All the postmodernist professors in the audience clap and immediately love this film. Frenchie dazzles the audience with pretty visuals to get our attention and draw us in, but over the next 150 minutes you will be getting sleepy. Then, bam! Title drop, so you know you're watching Dunk. Dunk? Oh, Dune! Awful font! That's the same one used for men's arse wipes. Behold our moody teenage protagonist, Paul Atreides, played by emaciated twink Timothy Chalamet. Physically, he fits the bill to play Paul, but acting-wise, he's crap. Chalamet is the male actor equivalent of Billie Eilish. Pale, zombie stare, and always mumbling.
Had quite a day, Gurney. Give us a song instead.
Enunciate, for fuck's sake! At breakfast, Paul's milfy mother, Lady Jessica, makes him practice his psychic voice powers. He might be the chosen one, the Kwisatz Haderach. That's quite a mouthful, said Timothy to the casting director. She also asks him if he's had any more weird wet dreams, as you do at the breakfast table. By the way, get used to the surreal dream sequences, because this film is padded to high heaven with them. Paul fantasizes about a desert girl called Chani, looking like she's trapped in a Ponzi perfume ad.
Rolling over the sands, you can see spice in the air.
Dunk by Calvin Klein.
Paul has got himself an exposition shitter 9000 to explain the complexities of the Dune universe to the audience. Basically, everything I said at the start of this video, but not as cool or sexy sounding. Now, before I go any further, I must clarify something to the intellectual big dick chads like myself who have actually read the books. This film is not a complete adaptation of Dune. It's half of the book, and technically less than that. Frenchie has cut out huge chunks of all the behind-the-scenes politicking with the Emperor and all that, which means there is no Princess Irulan, who is a major character in the book, and there is no Fade Rother, who would challenge the protagonist Paul in a final showdown. A lot of key plot points and characters have been cut. They'll probably be reintroduced in the upcoming sequel, but I thought you should know so you can adjust your expectations if you haven't seen this film yet. On the Atreides homeworld, Caladan, the Emperor, who we don't get to see, sends over his diplomats to offer the Atreides stewardship of Arrakis, with a guest appearance from Daft Punk. That was nice of them. Paul is perturbed by everything, and certainly there is a lot of buzz over taking control of LSD Wormworld. Budget Kylo Ren meets Poe Dameron for some quick character development. This scene is supposed to be a heartfelt father-son moment, but Tim mopes like a gormless twat. It has to be said that the acting and dialogue in this film is absolutely atrocious. Most of the cast have an acting range the size of a flea's cock. They either recite their lines almost completely monotone, or they spontaneously yell.
You never met Harkonnens before. I have. They're not human, they're brutal.
How can the Emperor take everything we've built and give it to that Duke? How?
In the future, facial expressions don't exist. Everyone looks dour. Throw into the mix the awful dialogue and the film drags. loads of the dialogue is large exposition dumps. Like I said, Dune is a dense book, and it's hard to convey a lot of its ideas in cinematic form. What's really baffling to me is you have an all-star cast of big names, but none of them get enough screen time to really show off any meaningful characterization. There's just too many characters. In the end, you care very little about some characters because of how little they say or do. Even Zendaya playing Chani has very little screen time, despite being plastered all over the film's promotional material. She isn't even that big a character in the book and doesn't serve much of a purpose other than being Paul's desert concubine. When Zendaya is on screen, she gives a half-assed acting performance. Honestly, I think she is an overrated actress. How did she even become an actress in the first place? Oh dear. Let's move on. You have Rebecca Ferguson playing, Mommy, Lady Jessica, but she plays the character as a neurotic mess who always looks like she's on the verge of crying. Jason Momoa plays Duncan Idaho, although you might think he was still playing Aquaman with his snarky retorts. Yet surprisingly, he actually carries the film because he has some level of personality and as such stands out from the rest of the androids reading off a script. Timothy continues to mope and mumble during an important training session with his mentor, Gurney. This scene is here to demonstrate to the audience how shields work, but the film does a poor job of explaining the shields in the Dune universe. You might be wondering why people use blades to hack at each other when laser weapons exist. Basically, Frank Herbert wanted cool melee combat in his books and stipulated that if you shot a shielded person with a laser weapon, it explodes like a mini-nuke and takes out the neighborhood. The shields are a deterrent against ranged combat, so rather than risk being turned into red people paste, everyone is stab-happy like it's the streets of London. It's just one of those weird idiosyncrasies of the Dune universe that needed clearing up. Another thing of note is the characterization is completely off in this film compared to the novels. Take the big baddie Baron Harkonnen. In the books, he's a hedonistic degenerate with Machiavellian thinking, a depraved glutton who enjoys sadism and the buggery of young boys. In the Denis Dune, he's simply a brooding fat man, no different than your typical San Diego Comic-Con attendee. According to Denis, he felt like the Baron from the book was a caricature, but I think the Baron's eccentricities helped accentuate how much of a malicious deviant he was. All Denis has done is take an interesting villain and turn him into a fat Emperor Palpatine with a shadowy silhouette that makes me think Denis is ripping off the Colonel in Apocalypse Now. Hack! Also, I can't begin to tell you how many problems arise in being faithful to the novel by gender-swapping and race-swapping Liet Kynes. Sharon Duncan Brewster certainly wasn't cast for her acting ability, possibly done for marketing reasons, so film journalists can make clickbait articles about identity politics crap, because that's how movies are marketed nowadays. Even then, the critics who complain about diversity stuff still aren't satisfied and think the film has a white savior complex, even though Timothy is Jewish. You can't win. It's all bollocks if you ask me. Right, back to the arse wipes. On Giedi Prime, we get to see the Harkonnens and their world. Denis wants the audience to know they are the bad guys and has them live in a dark room being bold and moody. I suppose he's trying to make them seem inhuman by giving them pale faces and lack of body hair. But it made me think Frenchie McBaguette was ripping off that film, Dark City. Hack! It seems ham-fisted and amateurish. It's the cinematic equivalent of shouting, "I am evil, don't you know?" Anyway, Skarsgård impersonating a football hooligan tells of his diabolical plans. At least, I think he does. He too has a bad case of mumbleitis. You don't get a sense of the Baron's methodical Machiavellian scheming like in the books. He simply grumbles that he has a plan. Meanwhile, Paul and Jessica get a visit from the Bin Bag Brigade, also known as the Bene Gesserit, and their cantankerous leader, the Reverend Mother. She is here to test Paul to see if he is indeed the queasy handicapped. We also get introduced to Dr. Yue for some quick character development. he's actually quite significant because he's part of a very important traitor subplot. But the pacing is a mess in this film. After sticking his hand in an old lady's box, Paul goes on his adventure to Arrakis. How will he get there? Well, under the sea, under the sea. I don't know why the Atreides have submerged their ships underwater. The last thing you want is your spaceship to be waterlogged. Worst of all, it's giving me Rise of Skywalker flashbacks. Oh wait, I'm getting Star Trek flashbacks too. Denny, have you been copying other directors' homework? Be honest now. I don't think Denny's brand of stark minimalism works with Dune's fantastical ideas. Case in point. In Dune, ships travel by using people who have been mutated by the spice to become space navigators. They use their drugged-up brains to help fold space and allow ships to traverse the galaxy. But for some reason, Denny is averse to a bit of crazy world-building and cuts that out. That would be too exciting. Also, the iconic worms who play a pivotal role in Dune don't make that much of an appearance either, but more on that later. The Atreides family arrives at the bustling city of Arrakis. The bustling city of Arrakis. Oh, for fuck's sake, attempt basic world building at least, Frenchie. Why did you skimp on the budget for extras? This is all we see of the native inhabitants of the city. A small mob. It's a huge city, but Denny has sucked all the life out of it. Everything is so big and barren, it doesn't feel like a capital city, even with these legions of troops housed there. We do, however, get the failed attempt on Paul's life from the book, but it would also be nice to have the banquet scene from the book that fans love, which sets up a lot of political intrigue. No, that would be too exciting, so Denny has Paul stare into space for half the bastard film. Right, back to dunking on Dunk. Well, aren't you a funny-looking fella? Are you relevant to any of this? No? Oh, okay then. There is some nice scheming and plotting with high cholesterol as the Baron and Grandma Painbox put plans in motion to attack the Atreides and kidnap Paul.
My desert. My Arrakis. My Dune.
He said it! He said it!
The Emperor is in league with the Harkonnens and gives them his most formidable army, the Sardaukar, who live on a planet that is perpetually England on a Sunday. They also enjoy throat singing and looking mopey, like every other fucker in this universe. Meanwhile, the Atreides go on a little adventure on the hunt for spicy worms. They enlist the expertise of Denny's version of Liet Kynes, who is described as
Eccentric.
I wouldn't describe her as eccentric. Willy Wonka is eccentric. Liet is just there, an entity that recites dialogue. She does, however, have the amazing ability to state the fucking obvious.
Duncan, no!
He's locked the door.
The audience is treated to some pretty long shots and exposition on worms.
Rich spice bed. By the color. If you get a little higher, you'll have a better view.
What rich color? Denny has desaturated the hell out of this footage. I can't see shit. Oh wait, here comes the money shot, the iconic Dune sandworm, and we get a prickly sand anus. Silly Denny, you filmed the wrong end of the worm. The penis worms have been redesigned as sphincter worms. Bravo, Denny, bravo. It's certainly better than the TV series worm, which looked like, well, a squirming poo. We don't see much of the worms, sadly. We get a sense of scale, but mostly get a bristly sarlacc pit knockoff. Most of the film is Denny just teasing us with glimpses of his worm. And when you do see it in all its glory, it's very brief. Well, that was disappointing. Oh, fuck my arse giddy. More flowery dream sequences. This time, my arch nemesis, the piss filter, is here, as Paul gets a vision of making out with Tom Holland's sloppy seconds. Then he sees all sorts of cryptic things and how he'll get his first period. Worry not, adrenaline junkies. We got some action-packed slaughter. It's genocide time, boyos. But it's a PG-13 rated movie, so there are stabbings and decapitation, but no blood whatsoever. Have to keep things family-friendly and accessible for the kiddies who heard about Dune from playing Fortnite. Fucking hell. Does Warner Brothers even know who their target audience is? Now, this is pure conjecture on my part, but I think the casting was used to appeal to a larger audience, that audience being the Marvel Star Wars lover crowd who pleasure themselves with Funko Pops. After all, it has Oscar Isaac from Star Wars, Zendaya from Marvel's Spider-Man, Jason Momoa from DC's Aquaman, Josh Brolin from Marvel's Avengers, and Dave Bautista from Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy. I find it hypocritical that Denny would shit-talk comic book films, yet still hire their actors. The reason I bring up casting choices is I have to wonder, who is the target audience for this film? Who wants to see an adaptation to a book that came out in the 60s? A book that modern whingy bastards on Twitter would find problematic. After all, it has people going on jihads, women are pretty much birthing machines for powerful men, and everyone threw away their smartphones and computers because artificial intelligence is the devil. Also, Frank Herbert wasn't too fond of the gays. I think in order to get more viewers than just die-hard Dune book fans, the studio opted to go for recognizable mainstream superhero film actors in order to get a dumbed-down geek culture adult audience to pay up.
Oh dude, is that the guy who played Thanos in Avengers? So is Paul like a Jedi or something?
I hold at your neck.
Man, this film is hard to follow. I'll watch a YouTube video later that explains all this for me. Oh, let's see what my friends are posting on Instagram. Oh bro, that's so fucking epic cool!
Shut up!
For audience members who haven't read the book, a lot of plot points and ideas will go right over their heads. Those watching who have read the book will be dissatisfied by the cut content and butchering of the novel, leaving them with a very unfulfilling experience. I keep harping on about the books, and it's clear at this point this is not a straight adaptation. I don't even know if it is based on the book. Suggested by, maybe? Well then, let's look at the film by itself. The aesthetics of Denis Dune are very drab, with brutalist architecture and a muted color scheme. This looks like an episode of The Expanse and not some high fantasy sci-fi. Even the Dune miniseries that came out 20 years ago manages to look way more visually interesting and colorful than Frenchie's sterile-looking work. Instead of bright, vibrant sets, we have grey, black and brown, and lots of empty space. It makes the film drag, as everything is visually dull. It looks like every sci-fi movie made in the last 10 years, with its grey, muted tones. When did sci-fi get so depressing? Where is the colourful futurism that inspires the imagination? Why can Denny never break away from this barren-looking aesthetic in his sci-fi films? To the film's credit, it's competently made, and it does have some nice special effects. I think we can all agree the Thopters look very cool and futuristic. Sadly, digital effects are the only thing going for this film. Everything else is hollow. I found myself not caring about anything. I couldn't get behind the bland characters and some of their non-existent motivations. Every set was either a slate mine or a tomb. I didn't know if characters were in a palace, a secret hideaway, or a location from Frenchie's Blade Runner sequel. I feel like Denny is rather self-indulgent, and that the dialogue is just a formality to rush the audience to the next pretty-looking art piece. It's basically an art house film with Dune references. Characterization and world-building fall by the wayside. But look, sparkly sand! Some parts of Dune were filmed on location in an actual desert, yet the visuals are so over-processed you might as well have filmed in a studio with a green screen and saved yourself a trip to Jordan. I know the film takes place on a desert planet, but actual deserts can be pretty. Even Lawrence of Arabia managed to capture that. In the books, the planet has its charm, But instead, Denis has desaturated the color palette so it's a grey porridge world, and then he puts on 50 million filters like he's an Instagram hoe. After a bunch of stabbings, betrayals, genocide, and all the action scenes from the trailers, it's back to mumbling and exposition.
You did this to me!
Oh, Paul's been at the spice again, and Chalamet attempts angry acting, but he just dribbles all over himself. Oh, time for another spice-induced dream sequence where Paul sees himself turning into a video game character doing acrobatics. It's an absolute mess. Look at this. You saw it here, folks. Death by nutsack. Millions of dollars of computer effects budget went onto lethal teabagging. That's not a nice way to die either. Those Fremen scrotums are quite pungent with all that hot ball sweat accumulating in their still suits. Why is this scene needed? It's a vision. It's inconsequential for the most part, and I feel like this was something that was added by the studio. The choreography looks vastly different from the other fight scenes so far, and it looks too much like a generic blockbuster action sequence. Perhaps this was a reshoot scene. I don't know. Speaking of odd scenes, there's a brief incestuous moment too. Oh, I see, Denis. That's how it is. You won't show us cool fantasy things like Spice Navigators, but you'll happily show us a mother eye-banging her son. You got weird priorities, Frenchie. Paul and his mother traverse the desert after escaping the Harkonnens, and Paul is spurred on by the prospect of some channy-fanny. Denis also uses this opportunity to whip out his worm briefly, but it flops away. Thanks, I guess. The duo finds the Fremen, who stand around looking broody. Why is everyone so dour? You live on a planet filled with drugs. Everyone is a mopey fucker in this film. Paul and Jessica finally have sanctuary, but Paul is more intrigued by Channy Punani. Little Tim Tim tries to show off his acting chops by pretending to find this girl attractive. You ain't fooling anyone, Shalagay. Paul meets the literal girl of his dreams, and there is supposed to be this sizzling romance, but there isn't because the pair of them can't act. They just stare at each other. No hint of a spark between them. Now, the movie is drawing to a close and needs some sort of ending. If Denis had adapted the full novel, we would have the ultimate showdown between Paul and Fade that decides the fate of the entire galaxy. What does Denis offer as a consolation prize? A scuffle with a screaming black man. Paul believes black lives splatter and kills the screamer to give this movie some sort of finale. For murdering a Fremen, he gets to join the clan. Then everyone pisses off into the desert, and it just ends with no proper resolution. Roll the credits!
Are you fucking serious?
Adapting books into movies will always come with compromises, but this adaptation of Dune feels less like cut content and more like whole amputations. You take a complex sci-fi fantasy book and dilute it into a mediocre, by-the-numbers blockbuster movie, complete with an unremarkable Hans Zimmer soundtrack. I wish I could have turned off the fucking awful music, as half of it was a Middle Eastern woman stubbing her toe and screaming into the microphone. I can't tell how much of the film has been reworked by Denis in his vision of Dune, and how much has been compromised by the studio interfering. Denis wasn't exactly happy about Dune going to streaming services, so I can only imagine what other disputes happened behind the scenes. There were reshoots, which is a bad omen, and while reshoots are sometimes part of making films, they can also be indicative of studio meddling because they're trying to make bank by kowtowing to some retarded focus group. I think maybe the studio asked for a few more action sequences to stop the popcorn munchers from losing interest and realizing they're watching a high-budget art house film. Dune is very hard to bring to the big screen. It's one of those books you can't really adapt, like Blood Meridian or The Very Hungry Caterpillar. The screen cannot do it justice. Usually I'm not a stickler over how well a book is adapted to film, but this isn't some poorly adapted young adult novel. This is Dune, a precursor and inspiration to a lot of modern science fiction. So with that comes certain expectations. Simply put, Denis has taken this crazy and complex space opera about 500-ton worms shitting LSD and made it boring. Indeed, it has action sequences to wake you up, but from the dull sets to the stilted acting, the whole film is underwhelming. It looks and feels like a typical slow-burn Frenchy film. I don't think Denis was the right director for this project. Yes, Villeneuve fans, we can all agree Sicario was a good film, but when Denis attempts sci-fi films, he drops the ball. Arrival was stupid with its time travel malarkey, and I wanted to like Blade Runner 2049, but it was boring, piss-coloured, and Harrison Ford was half dead. Dune is more of that stale, patented, Denis bland science fiction minimalism. The film is anticlimactic, and the only way to get the proper resolution needed for the story and to fully adapt the book is to get that sequel out the way. Why couldn't Denis coerce the studio to go all out on making the complete film and then split it? He presents himself as a passionate auteur who really enjoyed the novel, so I don't know why he couldn't make a longer film and fight the studio. If I was Denis, I'd be all like, "Zut alors, I'm an artiste, you cannot compromise my vision, you will let me finish my masterpiece and give me double the budget. I have a vision, and I will fight you on it. Hey you, intern, come piss on these film lenses. I want a nice foggy gold look to my movie." What accent even is this anymore? French? Italian? Transylvanian? Who knows? Mamma mia! Anyway, so I have to wait for Frenchie to finish the second part, a year or so from now, to get a resolution to the first part. Except I don't really care, and probably won't a year from now. Worryingly, Denis has shown interest in adapting the other Dune books to the big screen. I dread to think how he'll do the sequel where Paul's son turns into a clitoris monster.
That's not what a clitoris looks like. Oh, are you an expert on lady parts all of a sudden, Andy? No. What does a vagina look like? Well, Andy, before sex, a vagina is like a beautiful, unopened rose. And what about after sex? Have you ever seen a bulldog eat mayonnaise?
I think Dune could work as a high-budget television series made by, say, HBO or something. Throw in some ass and titties to get the Game of Thrones audience on board, and you got yourself a hit TV series. And there's so many books that you'll have no shortage of content. But avoid Frank Herbert's inept son, Brian Herbert, and his sequels, because they're shit. As it stands, the film is unremarkable, and thicko film journalists couldn't quite comprehend the source material and had to either drug themselves to enjoy this film or complain that it's based on a complex book that is too Dune-y. Yes, too Dune-y. Modern journalism right there, folks. Quality. Underwhelming. That's how I would describe Denis' effort at adapting the unadaptable. So, put it on the Dune pile next to David Lynch's attempt, and then we'll do this song and dance again in 20 years when another visionary director bites off more than he can chew. The lesson here is Frank Herbert's Dune is hard to adapt to film, and also pretentious filmmakers need to stay away from it.
I was raping Frank Herbert, you know, raping like this.
Do I recommend this film? No. No. Read the book instead. Just read it. People need to read more books anyway. Read the words and use your imagination, because unlike Denis, you actually have one. Okay, Professor, stay calm. We just need to inspire the troops. The Emperor's elite troops. Fucking hell. Why did they put me so high up? I know, I'll boost morale with a little music. Right, I'm gonna put my MP3 player.
Ass, titties, ass and titties. Ass, titties, titties, ass and titties. Big booty bitches, that's where